Sister Margaret Stinger, come forward.
Man, I'm excited. Everybody else, oh wow, look at this crowd of kids here tonight. This is great. And I'm just, how many are glad to be here tonight? I am. Okay, what's our theme? God has a plan. And we know that from the time before Joseph was born, God had a plan. It was God's plan when those mean brothers of his threw him in that pit. It was God's plan. He was working out something. He was working on something down here. We're going to find out that plan. But God was making up. He had a plan. And when they pulled him up out of that pit and sold him to go down into Egypt, because God needed Joseph in Egypt to work out his plan. And to get him there, he let those mean brothers of his sell him. And they took him down there and made him a slave. And then, you know, God had a plan that was going to work out down here a little bit longer. So he had to get Joseph into trouble after, and he was good. He always did what was right. He didn't know what God's plan was, but he always did what was right, didn't he? He was always honest. He always worked hard. And Pharaoh, Potiphar liked him. And then Potiphar's wife, you know what she did? She wanted him to be her boyfriend. And he ran from her. And she lied about him. She lied. She was a mean woman. She lied about him. And then he ended up in prison. All of that because God was still working out this plan he's got coming for Joseph. And not only Joseph, for a lot of other people. And so he was in prison, and he was in prison in God's plan. And when he got into prison, I don't know what he was thinking. It doesn't say, but I got to think he might have said, you know, I had those dreams. I wish I hadn't told those brothers. Because obviously it's never going to work out. They're never going to bow down to me in those dreams. Those dreams that I had, it's never going to work out. I'll never see those brothers again. There's one right here behind me. Got a tickle. And I imagine when he was in prison, he's thinking it's never going to work out. Maybe that was just silly stuff. Maybe that really wasn't, that God gave me that dream. And so he's in prison and he was thinking. How many of you think that he thought, boy, if I ever got out of here, if I ever get out of this prison, if I ever get back to where up into Canaan where I came from, those brothers of mine are going to be in bad trouble. You think he thought that? We don't know whether he did or not because the Bible doesn't tell us. But we probably would have, wouldn't we? But he was in prison. And he gets there in prison and he's just, again, he was just really good in prison. He was talked nice to the guards. He did everything that was right. He didn't, you know, most of us, we'd be mean and ugly. Man, I don't know the reason I'd be in here. I didn't do nothing to that woman. And now she's got me put, I didn't do anything wrong, and they've got me down in this place. Well, you know, he was just good. He kept doing what was right. And when he would do what was right, well, then the head of the prison, the main guard said, hey, this guy's pretty good. He doesn't, you know, he's honest, he works hard, and he's nice, and he's polite. So he said, I'll just make him in charge of all the other prisoners. So now things looking pretty good for him. He's in prison. He can't go home. He's in prison, but again, they're treating him pretty well. Well, in that prison, there were two men. We don't know their names. One was a butler, and one was a butler, and one was a baker. Now, the butler, he's the guy who worked for Pharaoh. Pharaoh was the king, and he was the one that would bring him, you know, when he's sitting up on his throne, this big old guy, you know, and the butler would be the one to bring him a tray with his drink on it that he made out of grapes. And that's what he did. And then the baker, he was the one that took bread. He'd take bread into the king, and Pharaoh would eat the bread. Well, both those men did something. I don't know what they did, but they did something that Pharaoh got really mad at them. That's why he threw them in prison. So they're in prison right there with Joseph. Well, remember, Joseph was good to everybody, and he was polite, and he was kind, and they kind of got to be friends, I guess. And one day, these two guys, they came in, oh, they're so sad. They're so sad. And Joseph said, what's the matter with y'all? Why are you so sad today? Why do you just look at this sad-looking face on you? What's the matter with you today? Well, they both said we had a dream, and we don't know what it means, and nobody can tell us, and we're really worried about it. And so this one, the butler, he says, I dreamed that there was this grapevine. It had 3 just big clusters of grapes, beautiful big grapes. And I took those off and I pressed them and made juice out of them, and I put them on a tray, and I took them in there and I served them to Pharaoh. And Daniel says, I can't interpret dreams. But he says, my God can. So he says, that means in 3 days, you're going to be taken out of prison. You're going to go back up there, and you're going to be just like you were before. You're going to be taking the wine or taking the grape juice and serving the king again. So you're going to be restored just like you were before. And then Daniel told him, says, when you get back up there in front of that Pharaoh, please remember me. He said, I've been here because I didn't do anything wrong. That woman lied about me, and I got thrown into the prison. Will you say something good to Pharaoh about me? And he said, yeah, I'll sure do that. I mean, you've been good. You can interpret my dream. I sure will. I'll tell him. Well, the other guy, he says, well, I dreamed. Got to turn it around here. And the other guy, he says, well, I dreamed that I had, have you ever seen anybody carry things on top of their head? Well, I've seen over when I was a missionary, they'd carry things on top of their head. I don't know how they did it, because they'd just walk along like this, a big basket on top of their head, and their hands are free, and they just walk along, and it'd make my head hurt to look at them. But I've seen them do it. So this, he says, well, he always carried the bread in his basket on top of his head, and he says, I had 3 baskets, and they were full of bread. And I was walking along with it, and these birds came. And he said they ate every one of them, all the bread, ate all that bread out of there. So Joseph told him, that means that in 3 days, you also are going to get out of prison, but you're going to be hanged. And sure enough, 3 days, both of them got out of prison. The butler went right back to serving the drink to the king, to Pharaoh, and the baker, they hung him, they killed him. So they were excited, but that butler, when he got back up there, he promised Joseph that when he got back up there, that he said when he gets back up there to Pharaoh, and he starts serving him again, he promised Joseph that he would remember him, and he would tell Pharaoh, he said, there's a man there in prison, and he shouldn't be there. He didn't do anything wrong, and he's in prison. He forgot all about Joseph. Why did he forget all about Joseph? Yes?
Because he was free and he figured he's not going to be out of prison. So.
Well, that's close, but what do you think?
God had a plan.
Right. God had a plan because it wasn't quite ready. God wasn't quite ready with that plan. He's working it out, but not quite yet. So the butler forgot about him.
What?
For 2 whole years, he forgot about him. And so he still stayed there in prison, and he's probably thinking, oh man, he got out of there. He forgot all about me, and I'll never get out of this prison. I'll never get out of here. But then one day, the king, himself, Pharaoh himself, had a dream. And he had 2 dreams. And he dreamed that these little big old fat husky cows came walking right up out of the water. And then the 7 little old skinny cows, they come walking up out of the water. And those skinny cows ate up all the big cows, just gobbled them up, but they stayed skinny. And then he dreamed another dream. He dreamed that all this, forget the story myself, I'm in bad trouble when you forget it yourself. he dreamed the second dream, he dreamed that this stalk of corn grew up, and it had all this really, really big ears of corn, just really good corn, 7 of them. And then another one grew up, and it had I grew up on a farm, and I know you call those things nubbins. A nubbin's got no corn on it, it's just no good. And so that second one grew up, and it had 7 nubbins, or just little corns. And those little corns just ate up the big corns. But they stayed little corns. They didn't get any better. So we had 2 dreams that sounds almost alike, don't they? And so he called all his magicians, all his wise men. He called all of them in, and they said, "We don't know." He said, you know, "You're the smartest people in this whole country, and I need you to tell me what my dreams mean." And they said, "We don't know. We don't know. We don't know." And he was angry. He was angry because nobody could tell him the dream. And then, you know, that butler, all of a sudden, he said, "Oh, yes, I remember. There's a man down there in prison named Joseph, and he can interpret dreams. He can tell you." So they sent down and they said, "Tell Joseph to get him up there. Bringing him out of prison, right? Going to bring him before the king." So Joseph comes out of prison. He goes in and he washes and he cleans up and he shaves himself, because you just don't go to the king just looking sloppy. You got to really be fixed up. So he got all cleaned up, and he'd been in prison for a long, long time. So I guess it took a little bit of washing to get him cleaned up, don't you reckon? He got himself all cleaned up and took him up there to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, "I understand that you can interpret dreams." Who knows what Joseph answered? What did he say? Yeah. Yeah, he says, "I can't interpret dreams." But you know, Joseph could have been very proud because he had already interpreted 2 down there to the baker. He could have said, "Sure, I can tell you. I know dreams. I'm really good at this. I've already got experience." And everybody knows, they know down there in prison that I can interpret dreams. But he didn't do that, did he? Joseph was somebody very special. And Joseph says, "I can't interpret dreams." Do y'all know what it means to interpret? What does it mean to interpret? What does it mean to interpret? Yeah.
To like understand stuff, like understand what it means.
Yeah, okay, it's like this. It's like this, okay, say, this girl right here, say she speaks a different language than I do, and I want to talk to her, but we don't understand each other. I speak in the Danim Chitakatahum Pakanmin. Did you know what I said? You didn't know what I said. So we don't understand each other. So this one here, she knows both the languages. So I will say it to her in Chitak, and then she'll tell it to her in English. She's the interpreter, right? So that's what they wanted Joseph to do, because he said these dreams, because they felt that, and back then they thought that dreams, that God had given it to them and they were important. They had a meaning, and God was trying to tell them something. And so Joseph, he didn't say, "Oh yeah, I can interpret dreams. I can tell you what your dreams mean," but he didn't. He said, "I can't do it, but God can." And so Pharaoh told him his dream. He told him about those cows. He told him about the cows up there. See, there's the big fat cows over here, 7 of them. He said there were 7 of them. Came right up out of the water. And then these skinny cows, 7 of them came up out of the water. And they gobbled up the big cows. But the skinny cows stayed skinny. They didn't get fat. And then he says, well, this is wheat, but said it should be corn. The corn was 7 big ears of corn, big on one stalk, big ears of corn. And then the other one, it was a pitiful looking one that had just little corn that wasn't really not worth much. So the little ones, they ate up the big ones, but they didn't get any fatter. And so he told that to Joseph. And so Joseph told him that the meaning is this. And he knew that God was the one who had told him that meaning, that he didn't just make that up. God was what had told him. And so Joseph now said, okay, let's ask you again. Where in the world did he get those dreams from? Who made him dream those dreams?
It was either him or God.
Okay, why did he have those dreams?
Because God had a plan.
Right, God had a plan. God's got this plan down here that he keeps. He's working it out little by little, isn't he? Isn't it getting exciting? He's getting close, isn't he? Right at the right time, because now he needs Joseph out of prison. So now he has Pharaoh dream these dreams. And he gets Joseph out of prison. And Joseph tells him, your dreams are this. They're both the same thing. So you had 7 cows, and you had 7 stalks of corn, 7 ears of corn. So both of those mean the same thing. For 7 years, everything's going to grow. The corn's going to grow, the wheat's going to grow, everything is just going to grow. You just got all of this food, all you can eat, you're doing a lot of stuff. Then he said at the end of that 7 years, those skinny cows and those little pieces of corn, little ears of corn, he said, that's going to be 7 years when nothing will grow. You plant your gardens, they're not going to grow. You plant your corn, it won't grow. Your wheat's not going to grow. And everybody's going to be hungry. And we call that a famine. A famine is when everybody's hungry. He said, you're all going to be hungry for 7 years. And Pharaoh said, oh my, I'm the king of this country. What am I going to do? Now remember, Joseph is a slave. He's not even an Egyptian. Now he's lived there a long time, and he's learned the Egyptian language, so he could speak the Egyptian language. But he was really a Hebrew. And he's a slave. He's a prisoner. He's a nobody. And Pharaoh says, you seem to be a pretty wise guy. You know, you interpret dreams, and you look like you're pretty smart. He said, what do you think I should do? Can you believe that? I can. You can. Pharaoh, the king is asking this little prisoner, this a nobody, not even a foreigner, just got him out of prison, and he's asking him, what do you think I should do? And Joseph says, I think that you should find a really smart guy. Just find a really smart guy and put him in charge. And so for the next 7 years, when all the stuff is growing and everything is getting, got lots of corn, lots of wheat, and everybody's got plenty to eat, he said, during those 7 years, you go out in all these areas, like here we say go to every county or every city, and go out here and build big barns. And so the people, all the food that they have left, they can eat for themselves, but because everything's growing, got lots of stuff growing. He said, then you go store it. You put some in this one over here, over there in that place, filled out with food, and fill all these barns full. And then at the end of the 7 years, when there's no more food to eat, then the people got food to eat, right? That was pretty smart, wasn't it? That was really smart. And so Pharaoh thought, that guy's smart. He is really smart. And he can come up with this idea. Okay, remember again, what is happening? God's plan. It's working out, isn't it? Little by little. Now he's out of prison. And now he's talking to the king, telling Pharaoh what he thinks he ought to do. And what do you think Pharaoh said to him? Who knows what Pharaoh said to him? What do you think, Isaac? What did he say? Yeah. So see, when Pharaoh looked at this guy and he said, he is smart. He's not an Egyptian. He's a Hebrew. But he can interpret dreams. And he said, he is really, really smart. And he's telling me some good advice what I'll do. So he says, okay, you're what I'm going to make. The wise man that can do all that. So all of a sudden, it just seems just all of a sudden here, Joseph, the little boy got thrown in a pit. This little boy that was hated by his brothers, this little boy who was sold as a slave, this young man who got thrown in prison for something he didn't do and stayed a long, long time in prison. All of a sudden, he is now second in command. Pharaoh, the king, is the only one that is more powerful than him. And Pharaoh says, okay, let's put all these nice clothes on him. So he's dressed up like an Egyptian, but he's not an Egyptian. And he gave him this nice chariot to ride around in. And he said, okay, and he gave him his ring. And if you wore the king's ring, that means nobody can say anything against you. Because you have the same power as the king. All of a sudden, Joseph is right down here. Now he's right up here. Boy, God's working out his plan, isn't he?
Yes.
Does it sound like he's working out his plan?
Yes.
Sounds to me like he is.
He needed him out of jail.
You're right. He needed him out of jail right now, didn't he? He needed him out of jail, and he needed him in charge because God had a plan, and he's working on it, and it's beginning to look pretty good, isn't it? So all of a sudden, here he is, and he says, okay, now for 7 years, I want you to go down there, and he sent all these people around, build a barn there, build a barn there, all over the country, build these barns, and you get all these barns filled up. He says, then, eat your food, because they had a lot of it. For 7 years, they had a lot of food. And he's put it all in these barns and gather it all up. And he says, and then when the famine, when all the good stuff quits growing, and then we're going to have a famine, then we're going to have something to eat. That was really smart, wasn't it? Because if you knew that next month you're going to go to the grocery store and it's going to be empty, you can't buy any food. If you knew that, this month you'd buy a lot of food and store it up at your house, wouldn't you? So Joseph was very smart, and he told them, this is what we need to do. So they did that, and Joseph, Joseph would go riding down his chart, and everybody said, oh, yeah, they'd bow down to him. Oh, he's this big guy. All of a sudden, this slave is all of a sudden, he's turned into a big man in Egypt because God has a plan, and he's going to work it out. And tomorrow's going to be the big day, because tomorrow we're going to see that plan that God had been working on all this time. And I want you kids to remember, last night I told you one thing I want you to never ever forget, that God loves you, he loves you, he loves you. And before you were ever born, just like Joseph, before you were ever born, God had a plan for you. We don't know what that plan is right yet, do we? You may not see it. Sometimes you think, well, my life is terrible. This is miserable. What's happening to me? But God has a plan for you. And all you have to do is like Joseph. Do right. Follow God, what you learn about him. Be honest. Be good. Obey your parents. And you'll see that plan that he works out for you. And tomorrow we're going to see how the plan finally worked out for Joseph.
All right, wasn't that wonderful? Let's give her a hand.